Welcome to the Electric Wire podcast. I'm your host, Kristin Gilkes. I'm the executive director of the Customers First Coalition, and the Electric Wire is a production of Customers First. Our coalition was founded over 2 decades ago to preserve Wisconsin's affordable and reliable electricity. On today's edition of the Electric Wire, I'm joined by Chris Stearns, who is the National Sales Director at Cascade Eco Minerals, and we'll discuss solar module recycling. This is a really important and timely discussion with the influx of solar installations across the state. And thanks to Renew Wisconsin for introducing me to Chris a couple months back. From the first time I heard his presentation, I knew we needed to have him on this podcast. After listening, I think you'll understand why. Another related topic that's been widely discussed is wind turbine blade recycling. And I'm excited to tell you that on an upcoming episode of The Electric Wire, we'll be talking with a representative from a wind turbine manufacturer leading a new initiative aiming to make blades fully recyclable. Today's episode is real food for thought, though, and I hope you'll let us know what you think by sharing a comment or a review. Make sure to check out our show notes for a link to the Cascade Eco Minerals website if you want to know more about their company. And now I'll turn it over to my interview with Chris. Welcome to the Electric Wire, Chris Stearns.
Oh, thanks for having me.
Well, we're happy to have you. And I feel like the first question everyone will want to know is, what is Cascade Minerals and what do you have to do with solar panel recycling?
Sure. So it's the obvious question, I suppose. But I mean, the minerals portion of our name refers to the fact that the process we're after the glass in the solar module. So essentially what we're doing is, after we obtain that glass through the process, and I'll get into how we do that, is we're more or less crushing that glass into a fine powdery substance. We're analyzing the mineral composition of that glass and then combining it with other waste streams of glass to sell a mineral blend to our customers who use it in different manufacturing processes.
I got it. So how did you get started doing this?
So it's interesting. So I've been in solar since 2006, and I've kind of bounced around the industry. I started in roof mounting hardware at EcoFasten. That evolved into working for S5 on that the roof mounting hardware end of things. And then I started working for a company out here in Portland, Oregon, where I now live. That was North Coast, and they were purchased by Sonepar. And I was doing electrical distribution focused on solar, commercial, residential. And what ended up happening is I was responsible for about 40 warehouses, and each of those warehouses had a pallet or two of broken modules that needed to be disposed of. So I was like, oh, no problem. I told my boss I'd go find a place to recycle them. And it turns out that wasn't as easy as I thought it would be. And in the process of doing my research, I stumbled into this company, Cascade Eco Minerals, and ended up speaking to the guy who's now my boss. His name's Kurt Spivey. And basically, as I began to understand their capacity and really who they were and what they were doing, I got excited to be partnered with them in my capacity as a distributor. And then it evolved where, he's looking for help. I was in a unique place and looking for a change and, some stimulation, and, I guess the planets aligned, so to speak. And here I am.
Is solar panel recycling all that Cascade does, or is the company bigger than that?
So that's a really good question. So Cascade Eco Minerals is the solar division of a larger glass company. That's DeLubic Specialty Glass. And so what DeLubic does is they process anything you can think of. So container glass, windshields, CRTs, which are the cathode ray tubes from old TVs and computer monitors, basically any type of glass you can imagine, they've been processing now. They're a 4th generation family owned business. Cascade came along, I guess, 4 years ago now to focus on solar module recycling, specifically because we see this potential coming and we wanted to be geared up for it. But no, by no means is it the exclusive, glass that we're processing. It's just the newest stream of glass that we're focusing on.
Is this recycling already happening for solar modules? It's already in the works. If someone needs these panels recycled, you can handle that.
Absolutely. So in 2020, I came on this year in 2021, but in 2020, we processed 5.3 million pounds of solar modules. And now that sounds like a lot. It works out to about 300 megawatts all told. But really, the bigger picture is that in 2020, our glass processing through our partner company was just under 500,000 tons of glass, or 1 billion pounds. And so solar right now represents a very small portion of what we're doing. And my role here is to increase how much solar module, material we're able to actually accept and process.
Okay, so when you accept this material, you touched on this a bit, but what happens with it? And then what are the end products?
Sure. And so just to, the broad strokes is basically we receive the modules in, and assuming that they have been, said to us just for recycling, because a lot of times we're triaging modules based on the contracts we have with our customers to say these ones can be pushed into the secondary market. They're still viable. They're within warranty and they're intact. They can still produce energy. That's a different waste stream. But assuming that it's just a broken module is the example I'll use. We remove the frame, we remove the junction box, the connector wires. So basically we're left with the bare laminate. So the back sheet, the cells, the encapsulant, and the glass. That material, that laminate, is shredded into smaller pieces, about the size of your hand, give or take. And that allows us, it just makes it easier to handle that material. And then it starts going through the glass processing line where it is crushed and mechanically sorted. So we're able to extract the cell material. We're diverting that away from the glass. We're removing the back sheet and diverting that into its own bin. And so basically we are sorting things as we go. And the idea being that we're trying to make more or less a pure stream of glass and then capture all of these other components, the wire from the cells, all these things are getting sorted out. And typically, for example, like the aluminum frames, the silicon wafer, the wire, that's all being sent to our recycling partners, smelters and refiners that do a secondary process on that. And then, as I mentioned earlier, once we've got that glass stream purified and set aside on its own, we send it to be crushed essentially in a secondary process for us, and then recombined with these other waste streams of glass that I mentioned earlier. So windshields, container glass, CRTs, and to make those mineral blends. Now, once we have the glass into a place where it can be used by one of our manufacturing downstream partners, it's made into any number of things. So fiberglass, new float glass in the form of, low iron front sheets for modules. We're actually seeing some of, the circular economy play. But we actually also, through our partner company, make road beads. And I had never heard of these before I started here, but road beads are essentially little tiny spheres of glass that are highly reflective. And these are sprayed onto highway lines as they're repainting those lines. And through a process of retroreflectivity, those spheres are actually reflecting back your headlights, in the color of whatever line is underneath them. And so, all my life, I just thought that was really reflective paint. And it is, but it's also coated with these fine road beads that we manufacture. So it's a long way of saying that there's a lot of different ways the glass can be reused. But considering that it's between 65 and 85% of a typical crystalline solar module by weight, it's a really important piece of this puzzle is to have a way to move the volume of glass that we're seeing in the process.
That's so cool to think of the circular economy.
Exactly. Yeah. It's taking a solar module and eventually seeing it be made into a new solar module. That's really, when we talk about recycling, that is the ideal scenario. It's seeing a glass bottle be crushed and made into a glass jar. It's reusing as much of that material as we possibly can. We want to see that happening in the solar industry. And frankly, we're already starting to see these very early stages where our partners downstream in the process are actually selling back to module manufacturers who are working in the United States. So it's early, but it's happening.
Interesting. So when do solar modules need to be recycled? I know you said that some of them could be broken, but what is the typical lifespan that you're seeing? And at what point do they come to you?
And this is sort of the hot button issue too, because this is the discussion. Modules are typically warranted for 20 or 25 years. And so that's the number that's always discussed. Now, we see modules come out of the field for any number of reasons. For example, just initial installation scrap. If you have an enormous ground mount installation, the likelihood that modules are going to be dropped, or that they're going to have a bad diode, or that someone put a forklift fork through them, or whatever else. There's so many things that can happen. So we'll see modules that are effectively brand new that have been broken or otherwise damaged, and those end up being recycled. A lot of the material that we see right now is working with module manufacturers who have opened domestic facilities. We see their factory seconds and their defects or otherwise broken modules that would dictate, a recycling process. But it's part of a bigger question that a lot of the modules that are coming out of the field are not really truly at the end of their life, in the sense that they're 10 or 15 years old. They have been replaced by newer, higher wattage modules, but they still have viable life in them. And so a lot of times what we do when we're having these discussions about decommissioning is we'll talk to the customer and say, listen, we will recycle all the modules that you have that are broken or that need to, have no other potential. But if there is a reuse capability on any of these modules, it can help to offset the cost of recycling, which we can get into as well. But basically trying to find a means to, divert anything we can from the landfill and frankly, anything that we can from the recycling process, because there is an inherent cost, there's wear and tear and labor. And so what we're trying to do is basically make it more conducive to people following through with recycling modules. And so, yeah, I mean, we see, I guess, any number of ways that they could come in: hailstorms, windstorms, fires. If there's a bad diode or something out in the field that causes a small fire, we kind of see just about everything you can picture for solar modules coming through our door. It's just a matter of the best way of handling them.
So, how costly is it to engage in this recycling process?
Sure, and it's basically the numbers we base our pricing on the weight of the modules. And that's just a way to standardize it. I know that, having coming out of distribution, everything was, the cost per watt and how many pennies per watt are we talking? And so I can actually break it down that way. It works out to give or take, and obviously wattage matters here. It's about 3 cents a watt, but really what it comes down to is for a 60 cell module, a typical residential sized module. Most of them are split cells now, so 60 cell is kind of still a misnomer. But it works out to about $12 to $15 per module, depending on how many of them you're trying to recycle. For the larger 72 cell form factor, we're talking about, say, $15 to $18 per module to recycle. And so obviously that there is a cost there, and it's more than landfill. And our job really is to be more competitive with the landfill, because at the end of the day, if it's so inexpensive to do that, whether or not it's, the right way, it's the way that a lot of these modules are going to go.
So on the landfills,
yes,
is it basically landfill or recycling? Those are your options at the end of life.
So there's the gray area in between them. And so what I think a lot of folks are doing right now, and it's a bigger discussion here, is that there's nothing to say that you can't store solar modules that are coming out of the field. And so I think what a lot of folks are doing right now is they hear the number I just quoted, they look at the moral implications of throwing things away, and they find that middle ground, which is to say, we're going to find some low cost warehouse space somewhere and we're going to wait it out and see. And so if I had to guess right now, and I kind of do, because there isn't really good data on this in the country, I would guess that there are an enormous number of modules that are sitting either in yards or in warehouses waiting for a more cost-effective solution that does not involve the landfill. Because again, a lot of these companies out there, most companies in this sector, have that green leaf with the dewdrop on their website that says, we don't want to do something that is harmful to the environment. But frankly, it's extremely cheap and easy to throw them away. And there are a lot of companies that, when it comes to the bottom line, that is the best solution for them right now in terms of their financial perspective. And so I would say that there's really 3 options. And I'd say a lot of folks are probably using that sort of middle ground of waiting and seeing.
Interesting. So do you have ideas for how to eventually bring costs down? Do those involve policy initiatives? What are you thinking going forward?
So, I mean, it's a big part of what we do is sort of brainstorm how we can increase the throughput here, because frankly, given the fact that we are partnered with this larger company that already has, long-standing contracts, we're not, obviously we want the business to grow, but it's not our only focus. We have other streams of glass that we can depend on for our, to get through the day. But no, that we absolutely want to see policies change regarding just landfilling these panels, because not to mention, you're taking up space in a landfill, we're throwing things away. And that's already, sort of a crisis in Western culture where we just kind of throw everything away. But there's also the implications that there are small amounts of, even in crystalline solar modules, there's lead in the solder, and there's other heavy, metals and just other materials that could be toxic as they leach into the groundwater. And so I'm not necessarily saying the sky is falling if we throw a pallet of modules away, but if we throw away 100,000 in every landfill in the country, is there a chance that over time that the leach, the water leaching through them is going to be contaminated? Absolutely, there is. And so we'd like to see, policies regarding landfilling of modules start to change. And obviously, that would benefit us in the short term. And so it's something I have to be careful about advocating for, because there is a benefit there to us. But what we see as the bigger picture is that, frankly, it would drive competitors into this sector. It would force other companies to do what we're doing and to increase the ability for customers in this country to recycle solar modules. So and I hate this, but it's a chicken and an egg. We need volume to bring the price down. To bring, the volume in, the price has to be lower and something has to give. And so that's what we're trying to figure out right now. Is we're doing a lot of research and development to increase the efficiency of our process so that we can lower the cost and hopefully capture more volume to just, continue that push to get the price down to a place where more people want to empty those warehouses that I speculated about earlier.
Who are your customers? And as people are installing these new solar facilities, are you working with them? Are there long-term contracts, or how are you managing the current installations?
Sure. No, and it's the short answer is that our customers are anyone out there who has a solar module that needs to be recycled. But I can tell you that some of the companies that we focus on, we're working very closely with many of the module manufacturers who came to the United States based on policies put in place by the previous presidential administration. It made more sense for them to operate facilities in the United States, which obviously it's a benefit to our economy as well. And so we work with, I would say, probably about a dozen module manufacturers in the country who send us all form of solar module manufacturing scrap, whether it's raw wafer and wire spools, as well as, rejected laminates and complete modules that are, for assured destruction. They don't want to see those go back into circulation. That's a core part of our business. But we also focus on developers who are building these large ground mounts. We focus on O&M companies who are maintaining those ground mounts. And more often than not, a lot of the modules that are being decommissioned or simply just replaced for, whatever reason in the field are coming in from those types of companies. But we also speak with, residential contractors and distribution to find as many ways as we possibly can to give, John Q. Public, the people out there who have modules that they want to see not end up in the landfill. We want to make it as easy as possible for them to find a way to get those into a recycling system.
Can you tell us more about where you are physically located across the country, and how much do transportation costs factor into your prices?
Sure. So it's an important question. Right now, I can tell you our locations first, and then I'll touch on the shipping piece, because obviously anybody who's moving material in this country right now knows that the prices have gone up dramatically. So first, I'll start with the easy one, where we're located. Our research and development location, where we're doing a lot of, for example, when we start working with a new module manufacturer, we'll often divert some or all of the first load of material to Upper Sandusky, Ohio, which is where Delubic is headquartered, but also where our research and development takes place. So we really understand each of the modules that we see. But we have locations in Pennsylvania, South Carolina, Texas, Oklahoma, Kentucky, and then we're working on a location out here where I am in Portland, Oregon. And it's just a question of whether it ends up in either Portland or Vancouver, just across the river. So not Vancouver in Canada, Vancouver, Washington, which is adjacent to Portland. And then we also have the location in Phoenix. And so those are our locations. And then, I'm sorry here, what was the other part of the question?
Do transportation costs play into what you charge the customers?
Oh, absolutely. So more often than not, what we request from our customers is to cover the incoming freight costs of a shipment. And what we are promoting, we will accept is, if you want to send us a single module and pay to send it into us, you can. It generally is not cost effective by any means to do that. So what we like to see whenever possible is full truckloads, because that's the way to get the best freight rate from anywhere in the country. And what we're actually working with a couple of logistics companies who have warehousing capabilities. So say, for example, it's not, conducive to send in 3 or 4 pallets because it's expensive. We can have you get those part of the way to us and then aggregate them with other pallets of modules from other customers so that we're moving a full truckload and we can defray the cost of that freight. But frankly, logistics right now is an incredibly important piece of any aspect of solar sales, is getting modules from where they are to where they need to be. It's incredibly expensive right now.
So how do we get you in Wisconsin or any states looking at policies like this and they're
thinking we really want to prioritize solar module recycling, how does a state attract companies like you?
Sure. And it's the question we get is, how can we get a recycling facility here in our backyard? And I wish it was just as simple as saying, oh, well, we'll just put one there. More often than not, like, for example, we're examining this Portland, Oregon location. More of the equation has to do with our downstream customers, where we're going to be moving these mineral blends of glass to. It's as important for us to minimize the freight distance to our customers as it is for the incoming material. And so it's a multifaceted question as to, we could potentially, in theory, just plop a plant down in Wisconsin. But if our nearest downstream customer is several states away, we have a similar issue as we have right now, where our facilities aren't in Wisconsin. You're going to have to ship stuff in. And so what I predict is that over time, as this volume grows and as policy changes at the state level, our company and companies like ours will respond to that. But again, it gets back to, you have to have the demand to justify the capital expense of setting up one of these sites. And frankly, it's millions of dollars to get the appropriate equipment and people and permitting in place to do what we need to do. So it's not an easy question to answer, because I'm not showing up with billions to do this. We have to justify that expense to be able to move into a new territory.
Can you tell us more about what do landfill ban policies look like, and are there other initiatives you would advocate for to help encourage solar panel recycling?
Sure, and I need to be careful here, because it's an oversimplification for a guy whose experience is in renewable energy to just say, oh, we'll just ban them from the landfills, because there's more to it than that. So I want to be careful to say that I by no means understand all of the pieces of that puzzle, and somewhere someone is screaming right now saying that's not it, And so I think that it's important to recognize that there is a lot to this equation to make it make sense. But ultimately, we're working with some companies that manage landfills, and they are coming to us saying, listen, we can't keep up throwing thousands of tons of this into our landfills. We have a finite amount of space as it is, and this country has zero problem filling that with the current waste stream. So now when we're looking down the barrel of millions and millions of solar modules that are going to be coming out of the field for any number of reasons in the coming years, this is a question I've been asking since I started in solar, is what's going to happen in 25 years when this warranty runs out? And the answer I get is, or has been, well, don't worry about it. I'm going to be retired by the time that happens. Well, that's fine for you. I'm 36 years old, and I've been doing this since I was 21. And so, I got into it early and have been given this kind of just bad answer, this bad policy of, oh, don't worry about it. Well, our generation has to worry about this. And so I think that whether it's a landfill ban or it's just a re-examining of policy like some of the states are doing, what I would love to see, and what I've seen the National SEIA branch doing, is they're really trying to get their arms around this tapestry of laws in this country, because frankly, we function in many ways like 50 little countries. And so what makes sense in California doesn't necessarily make sense in Oklahoma, and what makes sense in Oklahoma doesn't make sense in Florida. And so I think that trying to have more of a unified approach and make sense of this at a federal level would really benefit the industry. But I think until then, we're going to have to look to states and regions to come up with solar recycling policies and enact them.
Is there anything else that sort of gets to the issue?
I think landfill bans, it's kind of the easiest thing for me as the solar recycling guy to say, oh, just ban it from the landfill. And again, I don't think it's just as simple as that. But, it just like if you look at the way that tax incentives have rolled out for solar installations in various states, it can be the difference. Neighboring states are completely, different in terms of their solar landscape versus the states that have had good tax incentives over the years. And so I really do think that state policy, like for example, in Washington state, that's, just north of me, they're talking about this manufacturer responsible recycling bill that would put the onus of responsibility back on the manufacturers who sold models into the state after a certain point. I believe it's 2017. And so there's that, and that could potentially work. But they're also getting pushback from lobbyists that, work for those manufacturers who are, operating on very thin margins, and they don't want to pay. Nobody wants to pay for this. And so it's finding better ways for the industry to stomach the fact that we're selling something that's green, And then the end solution for it is to, hey, don't worry about it. I mean, that's really been the policy here. And, I saw that. I've watched this happen. And that's why I jumped into this role. Is I don't know the solution. I know that the only way we're going to find a solution is by really looking at the problem and not ignoring the 900-pound gorilla in the room. That is, we're producing an awful lot of waste in this industry that nobody wants to talk about.
It's so true, Chris. And I really appreciate your candor. And I think at Customers First, we really try to have nuanced conversations about these complicated issues. And so I do really appreciate you sort of sharing your side of the story, but also, letting us know there are larger debates happening on this and a lot of different stakeholders with interests.
So absolutely. I mean, and there's always, everybody has an agenda, and a good statement that I heard recently was everybody lives life in first person. Everybody's looking out for their interest in the way that they're going to move forward through the world, and just offering this opportunity, showing people that there is the potential to do this. What we're seeing is, for example, distributors are starting to jump on with us so that they can market it to their customers to say, hey, if you buy this from us in 20 years, or 25 years, or whenever you replace these modules, we have an outlet for those where they're not going to end up in the landfill. And they're able to, take that beautiful capitalistic approach to say, listen, this is a way for you to choose us versus some of our competition, knowing that down the road, we're going to do the responsible thing. And honestly, I think that the way our society works, it's going to be things like that ultimately drive this forward. It's not necessarily, I'd love to see policies change at the state and the federal level. But if the policy changes at the competition level between distributors, and the distributors who are offering recycling appeal to the customers who, that makes sense to, we will see a shift just based on people voting with their dollars first. And then as time progresses, hopefully we'll start to see, actual votes taking place where policies do shift. And again, I don't know if it's as simple as a landfill ban. I think that, again, is an oversimplification. But frankly, this tells you a little bit about me. A couple of weeks ago, I called 24 landfills across the country, just, going through a landfill website, which is a hoot if you ever get a chance. But just calling and pretending as if, I'm a contractor. I have a pickup truck full of solar modules I just removed. Can I bring them down there and throw them away? 22 out of 24 said, absolutely, we'll see you. And it's $50 to $80 a truckload to throw modules away, which is me plugging, my competition, essentially. It's $2 a panel to throw things away. But again, there's the moral implication of, we sold this as something to make this planet greener, and now you're going to do the lowest cost solution to the removal of that. And selling people on just doing the right thing isn't necessarily the right way to do anything. But that's basically what we're up against right now. I have competition in the recycling sector. They don't concern me nearly as much as these holes in the ground where people, are comfortable just throwing things away.
Chris, is there anything we missed that you wanted to touch on, or should we move into the last question?
I mean, I think all these questions, and frankly, I love talking about this stuff. It's one of the reasons I took this job. And so, no, I don't think that there's any glaring omissions at this point. It's a discussion of, I didn't know the solar recycling landscape until I had a demand for it that I saw very quickly wasn't necessarily being met. And, it's, I guess, as an aside, it's important to understand that not all recyclers are doing the same thing. And there's a push, there's a new website being published here coming up into trade show season called solarrecycle.org, where they're polling all of us in the recycling sector to determine really exactly at a very granular level what it is that we do, how we're recycling material, what our processing capabilities are. So not necessarily to endorse any given company, but to make sure that consumers have a very clear picture of who it is that they're engaging with so that they know the level of service that they can expect. Because, growing up, reduce, reuse, recycle was always taught to me. And I imagine most of my generation got some version of that going through school. Reducing the amount of material that has to be recycled is important. And that's what a lot of companies are focused on, is reselling, refurbishing, moving models onto the secondary market, because a lot of what we're seeing is 10 or 15 years old. It is still producing power. But not all of them are as transparent as they potentially should be on that. And so if there's anything, I guess, to touch on, it's to really understand and to ask the right questions of whoever you're potentially sending your solar modules to. because again, not all of us are doing the same things. And I think it's important to understand, what that is that you're engaging with.
Agreed. So, Chris, if you had all the power in the industry, what would you do with it?
Oh, if I had all the power in the industry, I'd probably retire. Oh, no.
No, we can't lose you.
No, I think part of me is envious. I've had really interesting conversations with my counterparts who are doing this in Europe, where there is a robust funding system. Basically, like when you buy a bottle of soda or a bottle of beer, you're paying a deposit in almost every state in this country. When you buy a solar module in France, you do the same thing. And that money goes into a fund that they're doing very advanced recovery processes on their modules. We're focused on throughput and volume because that's the name of the game in our glass processing business. That's just how we function. What they're doing in France is very meticulously taking apart every piece of the module because they have the funding to do that and to take that time because it's built into the system. And so potentially something along those lines, but we're up against it in this country where we want things to be as cheap as they possibly can be. And it's a cultural thing. So again, to circle back to the question and not just dance around it, I would change the culture around solar to not just get it for as cheap as possible, but that if you're going to do this, spend a little bit of extra money up front to keep this sustainability aspect of this industry moving. Because at a certain point, we're throwing all this material away. We're not just, creating a landfill issue. The glass, the aluminum, the silver, the copper, the silicon, there's finite amounts of these materials. We can recover almost all of it. Right now, we're diverting 100% of the modules from the landfill through a number of processes so that we're not throwing anything away. That can continue, but only if people buy into it. So I guess changing that culture would be what I would do if I could, wave a magic wand, so to speak.
Chris, this has been so interesting and I really enjoyed chatting with you. If people are interested in learning more about what you're doing, how can they find you?
Sure. So I guess the easiest way is cascadeecominerals.com. It is a way to find us. We're also going to I'm really excited to get back out into the wild here. So we're going to be at the NABCEP show coming up in Knoxville. I'm not sure if this will be out before or after that show, but that's going to be, I think, the second week of August. But then the big one, SBI in New Orleans, will be at SBI, I believe, booth 2171. So if you want to stop by and meet me and pick my brain about solar module recycling or buy me some greasy food and some cheap beer, I'm up for either.
That's awesome. Well, thank you so much for joining us, Chris.
Oh, absolutely. Thank you so much for having me, and you have a good rest of your day.
Thank you again to Chris Stearns for joining, and remember to subscribe to The Electric Wire wherever you get your podcasts so you don't miss out on our upcoming episodes. You can also follow us on Twitter at The Electric Wire, and thanks also to the members of the Customers First Coalition for your ongoing support, including Dairyland Power Cooperative, Madison Gas and Electric, the Municipal Electric Utilities of Wisconsin, WPPI Energy, Renew Wisconsin, the Citizens Utility Board of Wisconsin, the IBEW 2150, and the Wisconsin Electric Cooperative Association. We'll see you all back here in August.